It happens to show, when we get down into the bog, it happens to show all the different stages that the bog iron can be in.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to other bogs, it might just have like a blanket of bog iron, or some of the iron soup, or even just some of the bacteria that indicates that there's the iron production going on.
Yeah.
It was just traipsing across the bogs, and then there's a local lad who actually is kind of like a historian, and he's obsessed with Síl na Gigs. And on the grave of An Saor here is like what's considered a Síl na Gig. Okay.
Alright.
Yeah, they might get a bit lively.
Okay. What do you do when they get lively?
I say run faster than you. Alright.
Remember I was talking about the insurance?
Yeah.
This is probably what it's for.
Yeah, so this is the bog, and where we're stood now is what we call an island. So it's like an island of stone in the middle of the bog. And just over here is Gobron's grave. You can only really see it as the sun is going down or the sun is coming up.
Okay.
Or if you do it at night and you shine a light across it. But we have drawings going back to like the 1700s, which actually show the full design that's carved on the headstone. Yeah, I've seen the picture so many times that
You know what? Yeah.
I know what I'm looking for. As you can see, you have this. There's the head there. And you have this center line coming up here. So the books say that they're testicles. I don't think they are. I think they're inflamed lady parts. So if they're the testicles, where's his Mickey? And also, all the stories are about the relationship between An Saor and his daughter. Because when his daughter was born, like she was the firstborn, and back in those days, so he's talking 5th century now, back in those days, nobody wants a daughter for the firstborn, you know, so he swapped her for a boy, which was actually common enough. And the boy he got, let's just say, was, according to the stories, like, not the brightest spark.
Yeah.
So he got this like really bad deal of a swap. Now An Saor, he was the master builder. He had the brain of, he had brains to burn. Nobody could outwit him. Nobody could outsmart him except his daughter. And all the stories are about the relationship between him and his daughter, and him trying to, get her back first of all. And then when she did come back, she made him pay, So he fought Baelor of the One Eye. He fought, all these like English kings, and he'd build castles. He'd go over because his castle building skills were so, amazing. English landlords would like get him to build a castle, and then the stories of him building the castle, getting paid, and then he killed him and come back to Ireland. I like
this guy. And where did he banish his daughter? Did you say?
So he swapped her. It was a fair swap. He swapped her for a boy because he wanted a boy for his firstborn, and then really regretted it because the boy was not that bright and useful to him.
And she had his intelligence. And stuff.
So all the books say that the Síl na Gig. So Síl na Gig is I'm not an expert on Síl na Gigs now. I could be wrong. They're kind of late medieval stone effigies of the female form. So usually it's a bare-breasted woman with her hands through her legs, opening up her, can I say gi?
Yeah.
Fufu?
I can say gi.
Vagina. So she's usually opening up her fufu. How she could have and they're all over the place, but there's more of them in Tipperary than anywhere else. And there could be, like, you could find one, you know, carved onto the side of a church with, you know, the woman with the breasts out, a pregnant belly, the vagina there for all to see, but she's got cat whiskers and 2 tails, you know. So there's lots. Nobody really knows what's going on with them, but this is considered a Sheelin gig. But unusually, they reckon it's testicles. Like I said, I don't think it is.
And this is his grave here, is it?
Yeah, so that's the grave there.
Was it originally this there, or is that?
It was 2 separate graves.
Okay. Cool.
And yeah, this is where I came to find the iron. And it was just a local historian, just said kind of jokingly, you know, like, because I was really struggling to find Tipperary iron. He said, go up to Gobern's grave and say a prayer and head out into the bog. And sure enough, I stood here and went down into the bog, and you just see the little iron pebbles everywhere. So it's like, you know, like I said, I'm not a particularly spiritual person. I'm not a religious person, but I just have a bond to this place and to this story. You know, a genuine bond. It's a special place. Special place.
Then, looking for bog iron, what do? You just walk up the way we did?
I usually go just walk up straight there, you know. So the first time it was mad, like, so I found this, and this is like after months of like traipsing across the fucking bogs of Tipperary looking for little signs of iron. Fucking, I'd pretty much given up until Brian said about this place, and it's actually through that. You might be lucky. It's actually up through the iron all through the soil in the ground here as well, like, especially off towards that end of the island.
If you're looking for it here, what do you have to look for? Just, can you notice it above the ground, or you need to kind of...
That's the thing. So like nowadays, because we have board and Mona and we're stripping our bogs, often board and Mona will stop when they get to it because they don't want the iron ore in the turf. So then, you know, it's like we just get out of the car, go along, it's there ready for us to dig up.
Yes.
How they found it back in the day is a little bit different, so nobody really knows, but there's a lot of stories about them, or theories about them going around with big sticks kind of stabbing down into the bog until they find something kind of solid and looking at it. Yeah.
And along with
fucking bollocks to move that. And it was so like I spent months fucking traipsing across the bog looking for this fucking iron, and I found it, and it was like, my fucking iron. I'm digging it out of the ground. I'm turning it into iron first, and then steel, and making the item. So it was like, you know, it was really special to me. And a couple of days later, I had to meet up with another blacksmith up in Westmeath there somewhere.
Yeah.
To go look at another site, like for iron ore. I was telling him my amazing story of Jamie, the intrepid explorer, and he was like, "Oh, that's fucking amazing! Oh, well done, yeah. Do you know you can see it from Google Maps?" And I was like, "Fucking what?" He says, "Yeah, you don't need to go traipsing across the bogs. Just use Google Maps and zoom in." And I was like, "Well, fuck you, pissing on my bonfire." There's only so many colours, you know. Yeah. To a lot of people, it's not the most interesting place. You have basically dark browns and blacks. You can get, like with sponge turf, you can get this kind of slightly orange colour to it, which might look a little bit like iron. Yeah. But once you pick it up in your fingers, it's really obvious to see the difference between this kind of like rusty iron oxide and stringy organic, sponge turf.
Okay. What's this cotton looking?
Yeah, it's bog cotton.
This is cotton type material
that we find in the bog.
Let's call it bog cotton.
So like, you know, you can see some kind of different colours here, but it's still very organic looking. It looks like kind of soil. You know, so that's the sponge turf. See over in that bank over there.
Yeah.
So just over here.
Yeah.
So you've got the trees on top. You've got that kind of black layer going across, and you see over there, can you see the kind of orange shining through? We'll take a closer look at your step there now with your camera.
Yeah.
So do you see what I mean? It's like you'd walk past that, even like people who mind your step there.
Yeah.
People who grew up in the bogs, they're not looking for it. They never, you know,
Yeah.
wouldn't occur to them. Like if you like skip through the, you can see it's all organic material. So obvious once someone points it out to you, like. But so now I just step there.
Yeah.
So this is our actual iron oxide. So this is just iron and oxygen atoms stuck together. As simple as that. So when we want to turn this back into metallic or into metallic iron, all we have to do is remove the oxygen. So with traditional smelting we use the carbon monoxide produced by charcoal in the furnace is what does the chemical reduction, because we're not melting this, we're just taking away the oxygen.
Yeah.
You can see even little patches like that lying around the place. See it just like, see it floating through there. This was probably fucking 2 inches dark. Other indication you might have is looking at the actual bacteria. So sometimes when you're walking through the box, here we go. So see down here, like you see this kind of pollution there.
Yeah.
See that kind of oily stuff on the surface. A lot of people kind of complain about the level of pollution in the bogs, and you know, they think that this is spilt diesel, and it does look like kind of oil or diesel, but that's not. That's the iron producing that's the biofilm caused by the reaction of the iron bacteria underneath doing its thing, you know.
Yeah.
And when you actually see it floating on the water, I swear that was kind of some kind of pollution.
Yeah.
And the way you can tell for certain, because sometimes you do get spilt diesel in the bogs, is even though it does have like that oily kind of look to it, if it's oil and you stir it up, it'll go back together. But with the bacteria or the biofilm, I can actually look, I can leave my fingerprint nearly sitting in it. It's not going back together. You know, like oil won't just sit like that, like a film on your finger. And so that's the first indication that there's, you know, the reaction going on. Now just because you've got that iron bacteria there and the reaction going on doesn't necessarily mean you've got a good source of iron ore in the area, but it's, you know, it's an indication. Like, I think it's fucking amazing. I do. It's just like that biofilm there is composed of different waterborne molds and bacterias and iron producing bacterias, and it's just taking, so in the water there, this full of iron, full of soluble iron that we can't see. That bacteria is going to get its energy by just taking 1 or 2 electrons from that soluble iron oxide, and that'll turn it into like soluble, so it'll turn into like little microscopic little fucking bits like that, and just so you'll start getting kind of, you'll see like soupy yellow water, and then that'll settle over time. There she is. Must come back up here, bring some bags the next time. Loads of other stuff. There's plenty up here still though. That's just pure iron oxide.
So you could take that lump there, and then eventually, remember what you were showing me earlier on the bench. That's what you're turning into. That makes just that lump.
Yeah. So it would take about 12 kilos of this iron oxide, and it's very light. So 12 kilos is like a big bag. Would make about 2 kilos of an iron bloom. You know, actual metal. That's how much metal we'll get from it. But then that has to be refined. So for that 10 kilos, I might get 800 grams of like good solid iron bar.
Yeah.
So feel free to edit stuff out, because you know I've been
will.
accused of being a racist.
Okay.
So you hear him in the background. You hear him in the back. I fucking hate cuckoos. I'm not a racist. I just hate cuckoos.
Are they here all day long when you're collecting it? Are they?
No, do you know what it is? They're fucking. Even around the forge, there's one that comes back every year, and you can hear the bastard.
Really?
And you never see him, and I'm not sure is he totally in my imagination or not. I just want to see him once. I can hear him there all the fucking time. Like. So, one of the things, I don't have any great knowledge or understanding of archaeology or history, but I work a lot with archaeologists. And one thing that is like kind of really hard to get my head around, because like my understanding of medieval Ireland is based on fucking comics, you know, and cartoons, and is I suppose two things which I found really kind of shocking, which is even if you go back like 1,000 years ago, the land was the same. It's not like other countries where you have this build up over years. So when they're digging for stuff, I could be wrong with this, but I'm pretty fucking sure you could find 18th century stuff on the same, pretty much the same level as 5th, 6th century stuff, you know. So
Yeah.
this is the land we're walking on right now, other than where they've stripped it for the turf, is the same land that they would have been walking on that Goban's Air would have walked across there on. Like, you know, there's been no massive changes to anything. Like, it's mad, really, the whole iron smelting thing. It's like I can understand a lot of people look at it and they're like, "What's the fucking point?" You know, the best of Japanese steels over there for making my knives with. You know, with the best of German, latest in German technology. That there is like, you know, that's an austenitic stainless steel Damascus. You know. Steel isn't like it's a pattern welded austenitic stainless steel. It's latest and greatest of technology used to create such a amazing material. I love the modern technology. I love that, but it all comes from this. And it's a bit like, I think it's a bit like growing your own vegetables. You know, you can go up to the shop and you can buy some carrots and onions, and they're gonna, you know, you're gonna eat them. If you've been out there, you've planted them, you've watched them, you've lost some, you've kept some others, you got through, by the time they get to the plate, you're invested in them, and I'm pretty fucking sure, I've never grown them, like, I'm pretty sure they're going to taste way nicer to you than anything else, you know. And it's a bit like this. So if I'm picking up a piece of factory-made knife steel, and I'm forging a blade or something out of it, and I fuck it up, so I can start again. I'm going to be back there in a few minutes. By the time I get from iron ore to iron bloom to iron bar to carburizing that into steel to turning that into steel to turning that steel bloom into a steel bar, by the time I get through all those fucking steps, I'm invested. You know, if I mess that up, then that's a long way back to the start. Like, to be honest with you, it's like, so I have, Noel Smith told me years ago, you're saying just be careful. If you're getting into this as a passion, and a lot of people do it. This takes over a lot of smiths' lives. And now some people go off, they do the training, they go and they do their job, and they're just a blacksmith, and they go home, and that's it. But in general, like, blacksmiths tend to be like very passionate, and it's you know, it's not quite a vocation maybe, but close to it. When you're doing that and you're running a business, you have to be quite careful that you don't let the business ruin your passion for it. Like, so you were saying to me, whatever's going on, pick one day a week, and just don't work, no matter what's going on. He says, you know, you might find yourself in the forge, but do something, just prick around, learn something new, make yourself a tool. No matter how big your work load is, you have to have one day a week where you're just not allowed to work, and just remind yourself that enjoy it, like, you know. A bit of iron that I've turned into steel. And I started on a project for a really lovely chap a long time ago. And I just put a lot of work into it, and he's kind of special dude, so I want to I had a steel blade for it, and I want to put bog iron in there as well instead, like, so take some of the steel that I've made, and I'll have a look at it. I might laminate it, so put some iron on the outside, so I just have the high carbon core. It looks really pretty, looks really nice, but also a very efficient way of using get more out of your steel, because if 10 kilos of ore gives me 800 grams of iron or 150 grams of steel, well, then I get a lot more iron out of it. So I only need steel at the very cutting edge. So by combining the two, I can, you know, really. So if I take my iron, like I can see that's quite solid. It's got a good heart to it. If I was making a hammer or something out of this, I'd just start compressing it, you know, pushing it into itself. The hammer doesn't need a greatly refined iron, you know, so I'd get nearly 2 kilos out of it. Like, if I'm for something like a blade, where you're looking for that kind of, you know, refined kind of material, and you can see then, you know, how many folds you got in there. So each time you fold it, you're homogenizing the material, you're refining it, you're driving out any impurities. So the more time you fold this, the more refined the iron will be. But my first fold with this, so when I say folding, I'm talking about drawing it out to a kind of flat bar, like forging out to a flat bar, and then fire welding it back on itself to create one mass again. And each time we do that, we're just creating one bar that's more and more refined. So on my first fold of this, I'll lose 30% of that material. And my second fold, maybe 10%, and then 5%. So each time you fold it, you're still losing material, you know. Yeah. So that's geological iron ore there.
That's the word.
Yeah, so that's hematite from Antrim. That'll take like tens of thousands of years to form under compression in the earth. And it's the same stuff as iron oxide, it's just a different form. The main difference is this is formed, you know, in a long period of time. Irish bog iron takes they think about 40, 50 years to kind of form. And it's so pure. So this is 97% iron oxide, and this is maybe 60%. This has a little bit of titanium, a little bit of vanadium, but really it's of no consequence to what we're doing. The main difference is in the actual pre-smelting kind of work. So this came up out of the bog. It's literally just dug up out of the bog. I can just throw that into the furnace. I don't have to prepare it, it's ready to go. And you know, it's just, the main thing to remember is these are not iron yet, they're iron oxides. And that's what the job of the smelter is to convert these oxides into a metal. So it's like, you know, I could pass a magnet over this and it's not going to stick, it's not metallic yet. Like. And then other differences would be in because our bog iron is so pure with 97% purity rate that it's a very dry kind of bloom. So there's not enough silicates really in there. The silicates act as kind of like a flux when we're welding. So for the most part, the silicates that are in the ore will flow away in the form of slag as we're smelting. You know, they'll drip to the bottom and we'll get rid of them. We don't want the slag really, but we want a certain amount of slag in the finished bloom, because you can see here these little shiny bits coming through the glass. So as I'm fire welding this, the glass will kind of bubble up to the surface and work a little bit like a flux, you know, and shield the material from oxygen.
You appreciate it so much more, you know.
Yeah, and it genuinely means something. And also the kind of the temperatures when it comes to forging this material, the temperatures you're working at, they're so precise. And the kind of because you imagine when we're fire welding this back together, so tell me if I'm getting too fucking sciencey or boring for you. Don't, you know,
Nope.
Makes no fucking difference to me.
I do want to learn how it's done, and that's how it's done.
So you might, I don't know if you can see that, you see those individual iron crystals.
Yeah.
So steel and iron is a crystalline structure. People, you know, kind of think of crystals as being like brittle and, you know, but iron is actually made up of a repeating geometric pattern. It's a crystalline, you know, atomic lattice in there. And unlike modern welding, where I take a welding rod and I'll liquefy the material, fire welding is done at the crystalline kind of level. So we're trying to grow two pieces of material, both made of a crystal. We're trying to grow those crystals across the boundary, and we're using temperature, time, and pressure to apply those to do that. Like. So if you're too hot, you're going to burn your material. If you're not hot enough, you'll get cold cracks and things like that, and the material won't fuse properly. So when you're folding this material back on itself, you are completely in the moment. You know, there's not another thing on your mind. So it's like you come out here to do a bit of bloom forging, and you're literally there just for a few minutes, and you look up and you're 6 hours later. You know, and it's just like you're like, where did that time go? Because you're so engrossed in what you're doing. Not just for the financial side of having to go back and start again, but because you care about this stuff, like.
No, definitely. So when what we were looking at earlier, when you grab it out of the bog like that, and you just have it, that's what's in this bag here, unchanged. And then what's the first step then when you take it out of the bag? What do you do?
So first thing we need to do is get rid of the oxygen. So essentially we're going to build a little clay tube. You can put a string through it, or a bit of grass, or a bit of horse manure to help bind the clay. But essentially it's a clay tube about that high, and we're burning charcoal and iron ore together. The main thing to remember is we're not liquefying anything. There's no liquids involved. Actually, that one's like that one is that one is cast iron. That was accidental cast iron, so we'll ignore that thing. But you know, aside from that, just in case any smelters looking on going, hang on, fuck you, that's cast iron over there. So in that one there was liquid involved, but generally speaking, with blooming process, we're trying to just create the iron with as low carbon as possible, so that it can be forged and worked easily. So we build a clay tube, we put in our iron oxide. So our iron oxide is just iron and oxygen atoms bonded. When we put them into the furnace and burn charcoal, the charcoal is producing carbon monoxide gas, like anything when we burn it. The hot carbon monoxide gas passes up through the kind of dusty iron ore on its way down, and the oxygen in the iron oxide would rather be with the carbon monoxide, turning it to carbon dioxide and leaving behind just iron. So we're not melting anything. People think that when we say smelting, that it sounds a bit like melting, you know.
Very close.
So we're not actually liquefying any stuff here, or any iron. It's solid state kind of chemical reduction. It's basically what it is. Like we're just removing the oxygen from it, and then out will come a bloom, about a 2 kilo bloom from about 10 kilos of ore, and then we start processing this and folding it until we have a nice iron bar.
And then it's ready to work with then.
Yeah. Well, that's all part of it. So this is all the smelting side. Once this comes in, and historically, so like in medieval Ireland, like everything was quite segmented. So you had iron smelters. That was their thing. They smelted iron. They didn't know how to turn it into iron bar. You had blacksmiths. They didn't know how to make iron. You even had bloomsmiths, who were the in-betweeners. They would take the bloom and turn it into iron bar for the blacksmiths. You know, they didn't know how to make stuff. You had the ore collectors. Their whole life was collecting ore for the smelters. They didn't know how to smelt it. You know, it's, yeah, I think that's it's kind of fascinating. Talking maybe about, depends on how much care you're going to take over building the furnace. But from the ground up, you could build your furnace in maybe like 3-4 hours, and then you could smelt your iron in 2.5-3 hours. You know, and then you could just stay going then. You know, keep using it until your furnace disintegrates completely, and then you build another one.
How long do they usually last?
Totally depends on the type of clay, the type of smelter doing it, how drunk you are when you build it, you know, all the kind of final details. It's a hard one to know because so I'm just being completely honest with you now. I don't, you know, you can delete this next bit out if you want. I don't really give a fuck who sees this, you know. I've nothing. Yeah, I've nothing to sell that I need you to sell for me, or you know. So let's be honest with you, which is like, I don't really see myself as a blacksmith. That term blacksmith means something to me. So because I'm self-taught, I could be doing gates and railings this week in Ross Iron for a local farmer. I could be doing bondage gear for somebody in New York next week. I've made blades to go off to Buddhist monasteries. I've made hunting knives. I've made stuff for historical demonstrations, and you know, I've made axes and tools, and people come to me because they want something really beautiful to hang on the wall, or because they want a specific tool to do a specific job the way they want it to, something they can't buy in the shops. So it's an all-around kind of thing, but to me, and I'm not saying however anyone else wants to describe themselves, is totally up to them, but for me, I'm not that comfortable being described as a blacksmith, because I didn't do an apprenticeship, I didn't do an official training kind of thing, you know. I just bash shit and try and figure stuff out, like, you know.
Wait, how long are you practicing out, or how long did you do it?
So I'm only new at it. I'm about 12 years full time now, which in the grand scheme of blacksmithing, that's just the first days. You know, that's the early days. Like, you know, there's a great course down in Limerick. It's like a year-long course. It's NVQ level 2. You're not going to come out of there as a qualified blacksmith. But it's a good introduction to it, and you'll learn some great skills with some very experienced teachers. And then if you want to go further with it, you can go, most people tend to just take themselves, and so like, I'm self-taught, but I've learned a hell of a lot from some amazing people around the country, some, you know, really talented kind of smiths. And one thing you find with blacksmiths is that nobody's trying to hold on. We've got one knowledge goblin, but we leave him out of it. Like, we have one knowledge goblin. Other than that, people want you to learn. There's so much money and so much business out there, especially in kind of the historical reproductions, in the kind of in our towns and cities, kind of doing the restoration kind of work, that kind of stuff. there's so much work there that you're no competition. You know, it's not going to make any difference to my business if I train someone up and let them go off on their fucking own, or give them the work, or either. It's we have people who are there. We're competing against each other. You know, we're friends who are like trying to get jobs off of each other. We still sit down at the end of the day and have a pint, and sometimes you'll get it, sometimes I'll get it. It's no big fucking shakes, like, you know.
I suppose the job's it's been around long enough, you know.
Yeah.
The job itself, if it's lasted this long, one more person isn't gonna.
No, it is a very different thing now. That's why I say, like, you know, what am I? I'm a blacksmith, am I a bladesmith? So most of my work is knives and tools in some way, shape or form. I love, what I really love, two things I love the most are trying to understand what's going on inside the metal, so the chemistry and the metallurgy side of it. Like, it's just magic to me. So once you start trying to understand magic, it's you know, it's very rewarding, you know. I love that side of things, and I want to be immortal. That's what it is, yeah. I want to be immortal. I want my great-grandchildren to be playing on a gate that I made. I want some customer in Germany in 500 years, 1,000 years time to find a knife or a sword up in his great-great-great-great-granddad's attic and go, who the fuck made that? You know, where's that from? You know, so that's why I do this shit. I want to be immortal. Like, then you have, like, so as well as work with bloomer iron, that's my preferred material. It's not the most common thing that I work with. Most of the time I'm working with, like, just plain, you know, high carbon steels and tool steels. But if I'm repairing old wrought iron gates, I'll want to use wrought iron to repair them. There's no point putting in modern mild steel into a wrought iron gate, in my opinion. So, like, wrought iron you can basically think of it as the gap in history between bloomery iron and modern steel. Is what we have here. So this was made up until the 1950s, 1960s, but it's not made anymore. It's it's an amazing material, which will outlast modern steel by hundreds of years, because of its manufacturing technique, or the techniques used to manufacture it. So when you say the word wrought iron, people think of twists and scrolls and bedsteads and gates and railings, and like, wrought iron isn't a design feature. It's not a look to something. It's an actual material, and that material is really special. And lots of people kind of like local farmers would know, if they pick up an old plough or an old shitty bit of farm machinery, they'll bring it to me and I'll cut it up so I could turn wheel bands, old wrought iron wheel bands. You know, and some of them could be from the, you know, early 1800s. You know, they've had their life, they've been around, you know, they've been around wheels and they've driven the roads of the country. Maybe they've pulled a doctor around the place, or, you know, they've had their life and now they'll find new life again. So there are critics of what I do. There are people who look at that, and the skills of a wheelwright are fucking amazing, right? The skill that went into originally making those wheels, you know, that deserves respect as well, but we have loads of them. You know, I can't keep hold of every bit of thing, even this farm machinery and stuff like that. I love it. I love looking at how this stuff was made and constructed. All the beautiful little fire welding techniques and things that we don't use as much these days. And then there's also the history of it. So a local kind of historian who's into magnet fishing, every now and again he'll drag up some iron and he'll bring it to me and ask, oh, you know, is this any good to you? And straight away I could tell this was wrought iron. So I was just starting to cut it up and I found the name. So this was originally a pin harrow. This has been made in the early 1800s. So you can see you have your high carbon faced teeth that would come down into the ground. This would be like geez, easily 5 times the size of what it is now. And the horse would pull that along, you know, drag that along, and it'll churn up the earth. So I started cutting this up because there's not enough of it to actually restore it as an item, and we have plenty of these pin harrows in the country in fully good condition, you know. So I wasn't particularly guilty about cutting it up. And then as I was cutting it up, I found the name here, and it was a strange name. It was like, I still don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Begaden or Begaden there, and so that's the touch mark, or the maker's mark. And I did a bit of research, got hold of the family, and just what an amazing history. Like, so just something as simple as finding a little name stamped on there led me to amazing stories of blacksmiths making keys for De Valera and fucking grenades for the IRA, you know, and you know, like, and I'd love to actually, I think that's far back as reliable kind of history goes with that family, but that's a French name. They came over here in the Middle Ages as French blacksmiths, and they've been here since, you know. Like, there's just such kind of history and heritage, the tiniest little parts of it. Like, you could pick rivets or nails or any one little thing, and you go back to even Dublin in the kind of 1500s, I think. If there's any archaeologists listening to this, and feel free to fucking, you know, come round and flagellate me with a fucking copy of your thesis if that's what you want to do. Like, but you know, as far as I know, like, you go back to Dublin in, you know, kind of 1500s, right way back, you'd have whole fucking streets, man. You could have a street of nail makers. Every fucking door, there's lads in there making fucking nails. You could go to the next street, it could be a whole street of accountants or solicitors. The next street, it could be goldsmiths or silversmiths. Lads who just literally forged one type of blade. You had horseshoers, you had farriers, and shoemakers. You know, like, everything was so specialized, and you had amazing craftsmen. You know, some kind of random things like so. Like that's, and you can really see the kind of fibrous nature of the material. So that's an old kind of hook there. That's wrought iron. I'd be honest, I think that's beautiful, and at some point I'm probably going to cut that up and turn it into hammers or something like that, and they will make beautiful hammers, but not until I really have to, because I kind of like it. So there are little things that I kind of do with no logic behind it. I just like them, even like that. Like, you probably just look at that and think, I'm looking at the skill of the punching, and I can see the story of the forging. I can see the fireweld there, where he didn't quite get his fireweld seated, and you know, each piece there's a story. I know what the hands that originally made this went through, and where they fucked up and where they didn't. You know.
Yeah, what's that from? Do you know?
That's the foot of a plough.
Yeah.
So that's the key. Or you could have, over the other side there, the fire crane or something like that. So I get it. People look at a fire crane, you know, that we would have had hanging our pots and pans off to cook with, and going, oh, I'd love something like that, and that's heritage. And it's like, fucking loads of them, you know. A lot of them, like, could be made from old whale bands. So when I cut that fire frame up, or fire crane up, and turn it into axes or hammers, am I destroying heritage, or am I creating new heritage? I don't know. Fuck 'em. So a lot of what I'm doing is I'm making steel out of the iron, and then I'm testing its mechanical properties, because I really want to know. I'm fascinated by the actual real world effect of these materials. So what were these swords and weapons and tools like to use that were made from these kind of older forms of iron? because they don't behave like modern steel, they don't behave like modern iron, and no one has really investigated the mechanical properties. So like, by mechanical properties I mean like, how does that material behave with the world around it? So with tools and knives we're talking about hardness, toughness, corrosion resistance, impact resistance, all these different things, that we really we don't really know. So we've got a lot of chemical analysis. Some of the museums will let you like scrape off a little bit, and there has been some really well done chemical analysis and kind of analysis of the grain structure and the crystalline structure of medieval swords especially, but we've never actually physically tested their mechanical properties. We never destroyed them. So I can make the steel and then destroy it to find out how it compares with modern steel, but it's just one hell of a rabbit hole. Oh my god, it just, like you were saying with the, with all your episodes, it can just go off and every one of them can lead up to another kind of thing. And it's the same with this iron smelting. So now I've even gotten into kind of the microbiology of it as to why does Irish bog iron not have phosphorus in it. So I think that there might be, as well as this bacteria helping or making the iron, I think there's actually a waterborne mold that is working with the iron, and that's maybe why we don't have phosphorus. So there's a PhD project there ready for someone to go. I have scanning electron microscope images of the mold and everything, and it's beautiful. I can send them on to everyone. It's just amazing to see what this mold looks like. It's like.
And you think so? Because you were saying that Ireland, right, is the only country in the world that is 100%.
Yeah. So it's not like, so it's 97%. That's pretty pure. And to the best of my knowledge, pretty much all the other iron, bog iron that we find around Europe is very high in phosphorus. Now for some applications you might want some phosphorus in there, but generally speaking phosphorus is negative kind of impurity in the iron. This is one of the first bits of steel or iron that I made with Jens, and it's actually quite good quality. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to forge it flat. So this is the project that's been sat on my pocket bench for way too long, and it's because I really want this to be special, so I keep getting it finished and then going, no, it's not quite there. So it's actually going to be like a friction folder. That's desert ironwood from Texas, I think. So your blade is actually sitting inside, and then so it's like one of the earliest folding knives. So because the tang is kind of coming up over like that, you can't close it on yourself. So I've made this with steel, I've made it with Damascus, and in the end I was like, no, if I want something to really mean something to me, I'll always refer back to the bog iron, So when someone, so if somebody comes to me looking for something made out of bog iron, it's a lot more expensive than using any other material. I tend to price based on how much I want to do something. So if someone comes to me looking for, which I've had before, looking for a bog iron hunting knife, just for the sake of it, because they like the idea of it, they're going to pay some fairly big money for that. But if I get the feeling that somebody actually cares about it, means. So a good example is a company up in Dublin there. I met him at the Bloom festival a few years ago up in Dublin, and he runs kind of like experience days. He's teaching people about sourdough, and the medical benefits of that, and it's all to do with bacteria. And when he heard about the knives I have come from bacteria. He was just straight away, he was like, I have to have a bread knife. And you know, so to me, to actually, so I made him a bread knife, which I won't, you know, protect his privacy by not saying how much it was, but it wasn't a particularly cheap knife, but it was still a fraction of what I would have charged for somebody who wanted a hunting knife. But just, I would have made very little profit out of that, but I could see his passion. He had it, and when I handed that over to him, you know, it meant something to him. And that actually means something. I've loads of other ways of making money. Bog iron is about history and understanding and my own passion for the craft. It probably sounds pretentious as fuck, but it's true, you know. So I'll make pretty much anything, but I do get a lot of strange requests, and so the email was like they were looking for a cutthroat razor made out of bog iron, and my first thought was that is this some pagan animal sacrifice? Because they said they wanted a cutthroat razor from bog iron for ceremonial purposes. So my mind went the other way, and it turns out no, they're Buddhist monks. It's for shaving heads, not, you know, slaughtering animals. So I think when you get to a certain level, you can shave a little square out the back of your head, and then when you make full priest, you know, you can shave your head. So I actually split the bloom, and I'm actually not charging them for, I'm only charging them for one, because these people, it meant so much to them, and it meant something to me. So I split the bloom, half of the bloom made the razor for the Buddhist monastery up in Cavan, and the other one actually had a knife made there, which I just have to like finish off the box for it, and then, but it's from the other half of the same bloom that's going off to their headquarters, or their main place over in Japan there. Like I said, when I see that people, you know, when it means something to somebody, you know, it means something to me. In case anyone's watching this and thinking, oh, this is what a blacksmith does, that's what this blacksmith does. You know, there are people out there, a lot of blacksmiths who've never made a knife and have no interest in bladesmithing, because of Forged in Fire and, you know, recent TV, and knives are just sexy anyway, you know. A lot of people get into it through that, like, but there's a whole wide world of metalwork out there. You can have blacksmiths that specialise in just one area, and if you want to make money, that's probably the best thing to do, like, you know. We've blacksmiths who specialise in one-off commissions and public art pieces, other lads who might specialise in kind of rural kind of gates and railings and reproduction of that kind of stuff. Other people who are doing amazing work fighting the system to try and restore our, you know, heritage ironwork, which is not easy because it's really expensive. And a lot of the time people see the huge amounts of money that you would have to pay to get the likes of the railings around Stephen's Green. I know at the time there was like a lot of stuff in the papers about, oh, you know, however much it was, you know, a huge amount of money being spent on some railings. You know, that's all people see is our railings and this money. And the blacksmiths that did that up in, I think it was like Bushy Park Ironworks up in Dublin. These are amazing blacksmiths who are using heritage iron to replace heritage iron. They're doing things the right way. You know, that takes a lot more time than just going to a local fabricator and who's just getting mild steel and welding it together. Like. But right now, my little bit of stock, I want to start spreading it this way. So if I come down with the flat side and pressing that material and pushing it down flat. If I come in with the round side of the hammer, it's spreading it in all directions. It's much more efficient. But if I want to actually steer the material, well, then I can use a cross peen. So with the cross peen, if I come up this way with it, most of the energy is going to go into growing it in length. If I turn it this way, I'm going to get much more of a spread on that material. And I do a lot of teaching. This is not an advert. I don't need any more business. I have loads of people coming in here. But what I do like to teach most time is actually the skills of a cutler. So if we're doing blades, then I like to actually forge that blade. Whereas a lot of the times modern, even custom knives, bladesmiths, all of them, but a lot of them are basically just forging a point onto it and then going to the grinder and grinding it to shape. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Metallurgically, my knife is not going to work better than his. There's this myth that somehow when I'm forging the blade, it's imparting some magical properties into it, or that there's some benefit to that. And apart from a little bit of extra strength at the tip, there's no difference between my knife and somebody who has just picked up a piece of steel and cut it out and shaped it. So whereas what I like to teach is the skills of a cutler. Now, the way I'm forging this blade is not the normal way a cutler would approach it, because normally I'm starting with flat stock or something, whereas with the bloomy iron it's a little bit more processing, and you have to kind of do your best to push it where you want to. But the main thing about when we're forging blades properly is that when we see it like organic curves and lines like this, those curves are not got by bashing over the handle or shaping them. It's by manipulating the mass. So if I can spread this enough, if this is a piece of mild steel or a piece of even high carbon steel, I could do this and chat away and not even think about it, but I care about this bit of iron, so if I'm stopping and starting, it's because I need my temperatures to be perfect with this. If I hit this when it's too cold, I'll start delaminating it. So that piece of iron there has been like folded, maybe, or steel has been folded maybe like 9 or 10 times over back on itself, so there's like layers in it, like a sheet of ply. So what I'm trying to do is keep those temperatures right, that it doesn't start separating. It's like by far your best bet is to do a taster somewhere, have a little try, take a few classes, or build yourself a little forge and do a little bit. But if you can get over to Hereford, to the school in England, it's a 3-year course. But when you leave there, oh my God, you are ready to go. You don't know it all. But the quality of Smith they're producing over there is just, it's a bit like Force, like you can't really fail Force, whereas you could definitely fail that course. So if you've passed that course, you are already a good Smith, and should be able to just walk straight into a job, or set up on your own. first thing I'm doing is I'm just trying to create an even kind of billet of an even thickness, and then I need to kind of section off this material here. I think I have enough in this to do this project now that I'm looking at it, but I'll get something onto it. So now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to hold it over the corner of the anvil, and the hammer's going to come down kind of half on, half off the anvil, so it will section off some of that material. And especially with blooming iron, where it's so many layers inside, I have to be very careful about my temperatures here and gently kind of persuade it into shape. Unlike wood carving or stone carving or something like that, we're not removing material. We're taking material and pushing it from one place to another. So it's a bit like clay. So as I come over the edge of the anvil and start trying to push this material down here, that material has to go somewhere, so it goes back into the width. So you're constantly taking the same piece of material and push it on. So a lot of time, skills when you're using the skills of a cutler as opposed to a bladesmith or a blacksmith, it's very process driven. You know, all the art, most has been the art is in the design process. Once you hit the anvil, it's process. You know, it's like this plus this equals this. So I'm not trying to shape the knife. Trying to shape the knife as a whole. I have a plan, I know what shape I want it to become, and I need to put the material to become that. So, for instance, to get this kind of, and again, I don't think I quite have enough material to do this project, but I'll just do a smaller version. So to get this shape here, this nice little swerve at the end, I need to kind of forge this. I'm not going to come in and try and create that shape. I put the material in a nice straight line, and then when I'm forging the bevel, this is going to stretch and get longer, which means if this side stretches and this doesn't, it's going to bend. So this material will hopefully come out, the whole blade will start to bend and get a nice organic curve, and this tip here will start to kind of form out. So I'm polyhammers. Slope here and sharpen up this corner a little bit.
And it just took a lot of time to be able to tell when it's hot enough and when it's not, because obviously there's no screen saying it's at this temperature, you know.
No, I can't even see the steel in there. Yeah, it just takes time and experience, and so we need to be working steel between around 800 and 1300 Celsius. It will start burning at 1500 Celsius. So we're very close to our kind of disaster. You know, I could easily, if I have my temperatures wrong with this, I could pull that out of the fire and it could just be gone. Enough with that. So now it's time to tidy up the blade a bit and start forging out our bevel. So our bevel is that kind of sharpened angle down to our cutting edge.
So
So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to come over and, you know, you might just look like we're fucking bashing stuff and seeing what happens. It's not. So now I'm looking for specific parts of my hammer. So now I'm coming down to the arse of the hammer like that. So the idea with this is the hammer, once I start forging the bevel, the hammer is like a machine coming down in one place so that the blade can kind of move. So I'll move the steel more so than the hammer, because if I'm looking to create a certain geometry on the blade, it's important that my hammer comes to the same place. So if I start following along like that, I'm changing the angle of the hammer. Whereas if I come in nice and tight and just pull the blade through, so I'm going to come right in here and pick a spot up there. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm just pinching this down so I can see it's kind of swollen out here a little bit. Step up just like that. So we can see right with our first run of the bevel, our blade is starting to kind of bend. So that bending is not coming from me pushing it, but from this material growing in length. So by using manipulation of mass to create those shapes, we get much more even flowing kind of organic lines. Now if you're an artist and you have that kind of mindset, you know, you can just go along and draw your perfect lines and cut that out of a piece of stock, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I don't have that mindset, you know. Maybe including collecting the ore and building the furnace and everything, this little piece of steel probably has maybe 20 hours in it to get it up to this stage, and an hour we'll have the blade forged, you know. See this kind of swoop to the spine that we've got, you know, that's all that kind of line has come from forging of the bevel. So now we can just use, so I'm not trying to bend it over the horn, I'm just using that as it, so just to try and tidy up the edge a little bit. So with something like a friction folder especially, there's still a fair amount of stock removal that has to happen. I need to have that filed perfectly to fit in with the material that's there. Yeah. Otherwise it won't work as a knife, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not forged too close to thickness. So. I think I worked that a little bit too cold, and I can just see some little kind of stress cracks starting to form on it. Okay. And that is the beauty of this. The closer you get to your finished kind of product, the more and more chance there is of actually damaging it and starting again. But with bog iron, there's no starting again. You salvage as much of it as you can. And there's an old saying which is, bladesmiths don't make mistakes, just make smaller knives.
Starts out as a sword.
Yeah. Goes home as a keyring. see where I kind of pushed, where I drifted the hole open, I've got this little swell here, which is what I'm looking for. So what that's going to do is that's going to push the material. Instead of just drilling, when I drill that, it's taking away material. I've only lost a tiny little plug of material from the middle, and then I've opened it out, so the grain of the iron is actually going to be going around the outside, going flowing with the hole. So that's just sectioning off this little section here. So if I try to forge this little groove in there, it would just push everything around. So I'll come in and I'll file that little back section there. So in the olden days, you had a blacksmith and a whitesmith. So a blacksmith is someone who forges, you know, black iron, and a whitesmith was his full-time job was filing material. So after it was finished in the cutler, you could go to the whitesmith who would file it, you know, cold. But I can do some of that work for him, kind of. Customer wants this kind of like straight line, straightish line here, with the little flick up at the end. Then there's the heat treating process. So with modern steels, there's very specific routines and things we have to do to be able to get the properties we want from it. But truth is, I have very little idea what the properties are of this material. So the first thing I'll do is I'll quench it and see, have I got, you know, was my steel making good enough? Did I actually get enough carbon in there to harden it? That's the first step. If not, I'll wrap it in a mixture of salt, flour and carburized or charred deer skin, and use that as a source of carbon, and I'll bake it in. So even if there's not quite enough carbon, you know, I can still make it work at this point. Yeah. And even with scanning electron microscopes and stuff like that, carbon is fucking tiny. Carbon atoms are really, really small compared to iron atoms. And it's one of the hardest things to accurately, even in lab lab conditions, to actually measure it. So we have a very rough, approximate way of doing it. So now look, there's no show winners, there's a lot of tidying up on the grinder to get it looking nice, but even with just a few hand tools we can get very close to our final geometry, to our final shape, even just a bit of shaping on the grinder or by file work. So what I'm looking for here is something called recoalescence. It's an exothermic reaction within the steel where at a certain temperature, as the blade cools, it actually starts heating itself back up again. Now it always happens in iron and steel, and it's with modern steels, it's a great way of accurately gauging our temperature. With historic iron, it's not as visual. It's happening there on some level, it has to happen because there's a change in phase. So we know it's happening, but with the naked eye you can't really see it the same way you can with modern steels. One day though.
Yeah,
One day. And that's due to like all modern steel has manganese in it, and manganese helps with the hardenability. So hardenability is the speed at which you need to cool your steel for it to harden. So this has very, very low hardenability. That doesn't mean it can't get very hard. It means you have to cool it super, super quick. But before I do that, I'm going to normalize it. So normalizing is just through the forging process, our crystal structure inside got bashed up and fucked around, and it's all different sizes. So the first thing you have to do is make all the crystals the same size, and that's what I was doing before. And now what I'm doing is just barely getting it hot enough so that it changes phase, but not hot enough to maintain that crystal size, so it'll start shrinking the crystals down inside. And every time it's heating and cooling, it's every time it's heating and cooling, it's releasing any excess carbon in the form of carbide. This is probably boring as fuck for most people, in and out of solution. And then when we come to harden it, it's like absorbing all that carbon, and it doesn't have space at room temperature for that much carbon. So when I quench it, it's locking it into position. So that's what gives us its hardness, is we put extra carbon into the structure and cooled it so fast that they can't eject it. So even though hardness is a surface property, it's the surface of a material's ability to resist scratching and indentation, that comes from the internal pressure of the crystal structure being, basically we shoved a load of carbon up its hole and frozen it, and it's not one bit happy about that. So although it's going to be much harder, it won't. It's also going to be very brittle. So then tempering comes in. So tempering is heating up to fairly low temperatures, around 200 Celsius or so, and it sacrifices a little bit of hardness, but we gain a lot of toughness, because toughness and hardness oppose each other. And I'm using the magnet as a very approximate kind of temperature gauge, because iron loses its magnetism around 780 Celsius, which is fairly close to our kind of crossover temperature with this material. And yes, I deliberately did that. When I came into that, if I just plunged that straight down into the bottom, you wouldn't get any fire. Yeah. Now the first thing we're looking for, oh, and that's a fucking damn good start, excuse my language. So this kind of grey colour we've got coming through here, that's a really good indication of martensite. So martensite is what we call hardened steel. So that's a really good indication. The other thing we can do is use a spark test. So if ever anyone finds a piece of iron or steel or something out in the garden and they're wondering what it is, we can use anything that creates sparks. So a mini grinder with a flat disc or even a cutting disc, anything that creates sparks. So if I take a piece of mild steel, if I look at the sparks, they're quite straight and there's not much activity. They're straight sparks, there's no bursts on the end of them. It's some little burst. That's a good indication of the carbon content. If I take a manufactured knife steel, you come in, we have more. If I get a stainless steel, we have a very different kind of spark pattern to it. So I'm going to look at my steel that we've made ourselves. That's a good indication there. This is you could find it equally frustrating and rewarding, you know, making your own iron and steel. You know, you put in a lot of work, and I don't know till I'm finished this whether it's going to, you know, actually work as a knife or not. Now, I'll always turn it into something else that will work. But we need to know. I don't want to send this out to someone and kind of be guessing what it's like. So we need to test it properly. So first I want to bring it up to about 120 grit. And even the belt grinder can generate enough heat to actually ruin the hardness that we put in there. So then I come over to my tester. So these are really, really, really accurate hardness testers. What I'm doing is as I wind this, I'm lifting up the steel into a conical diamond. Then I'll zero it. So that's lifting 15 kilos of weight up into a conical diamond. And now when I drop the hammer, this is now dropping 75 kilos of weight onto that same diamond. Stop. No, that's not too bad. And now when I lift this back up, it'll measure the difference between the 75 kilos and the 15 kilos of pressure and measure how much penetration it made, and gives me the Rockwell hardness. Okay, so we got 50 Rockwell there. So that's where the hardenability comes into it. So at the cutting edge where it's kind of thinner, now there's still a lot of grinding to be done there, the material was thin enough that it could cool quicker to actually get that hardness. The material at the back was kind of thicker and can't cool as quickly, so we didn't get as much hardness at the spinal knife. But for this we don't need it, we only need a hardness at the cutting edge. So I'll go back in now and I'll put that through a load of processes to actually get the most out of it, but I'm confident That's gonna make a good knife. You know? Maybe I'm a bit too educational with this stuff. People might just want to see fluffy stuff, so I'm not a fluffy kind of person, you know. And that's me. That's what I do. So fuck yous. Jesus, don't put that in there. For the love of God.